welcome to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We're two physical therapists living the life in Las Vegas. I'm Dr. Erica.
And I'm Dr. Joe. We created this podcast for two reasons. First, to connect the healthcare, wellness, and fitness communities in Las Vegas. And second, to highlight all the amazing people we've met along the way.
Thank you for listening, and remember to take care of yourself.
Today we speak with Harjiv, who is a Ph.D. student with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition Sciences. He tells us how to improve our performance in athletics and life with specific types of cueing.
All right, Harjiv Singh, thank you so much for being on La Vida Las Vegas podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so first up, why did you choose Las Vegas?
Oh, well, as a PhD student, you really look for sort of the advisor that you want to be under primarily. And I never really thought that I would really study in the city of Las Vegas. Coming from a small town, New Jersey, it's you think of Las Vegas as like one of those, like how everyone portrays it, right? Like the place where you go for vacation, and that's pretty much it. But when I started to get into the discipline that I'm studying in motor learning, this one name kept popping up, and then her name is Dr. Gabrielle Wolf, and my interests and her interests aligned really well. And I knew that if I wanted to really get sort of advisement from an expert in the field, I'd have to come here and pursue my PhD. And that's exactly what I did. I reached out to Dr. Gabby Wolf, who's a professor here, distinguished professor here at UNLV, and we were able to set it up, and I interviewed, and here I am, almost done with my PhD.
So what does motor learning entail? Because I feel like it's a large definition and encompasses a lot of things. Can you tell us more about what it means?
Yeah, so motor learning is essentially, how do we permanently learn motor skills? So, for example, it can be walking, it can be running, learning how to throw a ball, learning how to extend your knee after an ACL injury, whatever it may be. What are the most optimal ways we can allow that to happen? And we usually test motor learning through like retention and transfer. So if I were to put it into a physical therapy context, for example, whatever I do in the clinic today, can I retain that same thing tomorrow or a week from now? And then can I transfer that to, say, the soccer field if I'm a soccer player and whatnot? So that's how we test it. But at the end of the day, we primarily study what are ways to optimize that process of learning motor skills, and we look at it in the sense of, as a coach or a clinician, what can I do better? How can I do it better to allow my athlete, my patient, to learn and perform more optimally than they already are? So that's pretty much I think an easy definition for what motor learning is.
So how did you get started into that? Like, at what point were you like, okay, motor learning, that's the path?
Yeah. So actually it was, so I played college volleyball, and my senior year I tore my ACL. I kind of like that got me interested initially. I always wanted to go to medical school at first, but then I got hurt, and like every sort of other physical therapy student, you get hurt and you're like, oh, well, physical therapy is really interesting. So I got hooked to the physical therapy field, and more importantly, when I was going through my rehab, it was pretty awesome to see that physical therapists would instruct me to do something and I'd do it, and there was times where they'd instruct me to do something and I didn't understand what they were asking me to do, and so sometimes I struggled as well. And it got me thinking about this aspect of like language, and that got me interested in attentional focus, because I feel like every instruction or cue that we give to our athletes or patients, there's some sort of attentional component to it. And so so that got me interested in motor learning. So I was really interested in that, and then I went ahead and I applied to Columbia University's master's program, and that's where I was able to do a master's in motor learning. And from there, I kind of was hooked on it. I wanted this aspect of just changing a couple words in our instruction and feedback can drastically optimize learning performance in all populations. This goes from not only athletes, but even from spinal cord injury or neurological disorders or whatever it may be. And so that got me interested right away. And so I was kind of hooked on motor learning. And then from there, I kind of just took it full force and took a couple of years off. I worked, I went overseas and I did some research, came back and here I am. So
What are some examples of the cues that you would use, and how would that change what the person's able to accomplish?
Yeah, so I think the more sort of the example that I use all the time is if I'm telling someone to squat, for example, or let's just say I'm coming up from a squat, I can tell them to extend their knees or push the floor away. And pushing the floor away is what we've seen is that is called an external focus of attention, where you're concentrating on the movement effect, not sort of the coordination of the body. So what our lab has done, mostly what Dr. Wolf has done in her past decade of research, is showing that this idea of an external focus of attention or concentrating on the movement effect is far beyond better than an internal focus or saying, hey, extend your knees, or sort of focusing on the coordination of the body. Now, it's contrary to popular belief because we think that obviously if I tell someone to focus on the coordination of the body, they're going to do better. But again, what the research has shown is that it's actually the other way around. And so now we're getting into the nuances of like, how can we better develop these external focus of attention cues? And this is when we get into the rabbit hole of using metaphors or images or analogies, all not focusing on the coordination of the body. And again, we've seen that it's worked better. We actually I was just writing a paper on like a clinician's guide to attentional focus cues and this idea of an external focus. And one of the examples we gave was if you're coming off an ACL injury and you're doing some balance exercises, you're typically on like either a Bosu ball or like one of those stable, like the foams, the blue foams or whatever it is. So you can tell an individual to really concentrate on keeping sort of like the foam level or the Bosu ball level, or concentrate on keeping their feet level and stuff like that. So what the difference is that idea of an external focus has shown to be a lot better for learning and performance. And yeah, so that's pretty much it.
You talked about attentional focus in general. How have you used what you learn in motor learning to focus on your own research? I feel like it's tough, right? Because what you're actually studying is very different than what you have to synthesize and sit at a computer to do. How do you use focus, and how does that affect your daily work?
Yeah, so I genuinely love what I do. So I think that's a big portion of it. Where if you genuinely love what you do, you're gonna spend all day reading or all day writing or whatnot. So that's one thing. In terms of sort of my own attention, I always look at the sort of end goal. 3 years ago when I started, it was I want to be in this position, sort of ready to take my comprehensive exams and defend my sort of dissertation and finish. And so like kind of keeping sort of this perspective, I think has always helped me, knowing that these little things are going to come in the way, where sometimes it's going to be a day where you don't get anything done, or a weekend where you want to take a little bit, time off, or go play volleyball because, well, you want to just be sane. And then so they're going to come, and coming from a sort of like an athletic background, it's that's what we've been taught, right? It's like, first of all, you got to compete. Second of all, there'll be days where you don't want to compete, or you're just not at the sort of level where you want to be at, and you got to take a step back in order to take 3 steps forward. So just keeping my sort of my eye on the end goal, what I want to become. I think once I started my PhD, I was really excited about it, number one, but more importantly, I really knew what I wanted to do. And I think that clarity gave me sort of this goal to pursue. And every day it's can I take one step towards that goal? If not, it's okay, but let's try to get more days that are stepping towards the goal than stepping backwards. So, yeah.
So whenever you're playing sports yourself, are you like giving yourself the cues that you would give the patients? Like, okay, I'm playing volleyball.
Yeah.
I need to think of the extra
Actually,
cue.
yeah, spot on. Because there'll be times where beach volleyball versus let's just say beach volleyball, you're playing with one partner and you make a mistake and whatnot. They'll probably start telling you what to do and coordination of the body. And I get it, because that's what we've been taught, and that's sort of how we grew up playing, whatever. So it's okay. I just kind of take it through one ear out the other. I kind of simplify what I need to do better. And so if let's say I swing into the net, right, maybe my elbow dropped a little bit, but I just tell myself, I'll focus on like a little target area on the other side of the court. And for me, that's all I need to know. I don't need someone to tell me to lift my elbow higher. Uh, so that's that. And same thing with indoor volleyball, as a setter, it's, everyone's telling you that you have to set the ball better. So um, by doing that, you kind of start thinking about your own body and your posture and and how you're extending your elbows. And I kind of stopped worrying about that. And all of a sudden, I might be biased, but I do feel like I just perform better if I just stop thinking about it. And so I do apply it in my sort of whenever I go play. Um, but it is something that we need to work on in terms of telling clinicians, coaches, and other players to do. It's really interesting because even like these expert level players, when they're talking, they'll actually never really reference their body in a sense. When they're giving like, how do you, for example, if you ask an Olympic passer how they pass, most of the times they're not going to even refer to their body. So you kind of get to see like this idea already there implicitly. But again, as coaches and clinicians, we often tend to do it the other way around. But yeah, to your point, I do always tell myself to use these external cues to better my sort of performance. So
One of my favorite cues I've heard someone use, that someone that we're friends with, was try trying. Like,
yeah,
great cue. So so it's interesting. It's strange that into itself can be such a separate field, because you think that you're like
yeah.
someone or training them. And it does seem like coaches that are maybe intuitive, is it that they just have that intuitive nature of this is the best way to communicate and that's what made them the good coach? Or is it that they really spent time like dissecting these things and coming up with it? Because you think of some older like powerlifting coaches or something, and they'll tell people that like, oh, just push your feet across from push your feet on the floor,
Yeah.
stand up. They
I
use those.
think I think the literature has made its way to show that external foci are better, and that's why we kind of like. It's probably in sports psychology. It's probably the most sort of uh, number one, the most studied sort of entity that has shown similar sort of results across the board. I mean, there's over 200 studies, maybe almost up to 300 now, looking at this same effect, and it's shown, that external is better than internal. Coaches have definitely, from my understanding, bought into it for sure. Sometimes where the issue is how to apply it. So everyone knows that external focus cues are better. But then the questions, what happens is that the questions we get are usually around technique change. How can I change technique of a player or patient? Because that kind of gets difficult to do with only external cues. But then what happens is that coaches bring their sort of own experiences into the mix. And I think, bringing your own experiences is great, but most of the time you were taught by more old school coaches, which then kind of again, becomes all confusing in a sense. And so I think that's where the sort of the application portion, I think we need to do a little bit better, because there's also been studies where um, people have done surveys and questionnaires with players and asked them, what do their coaches say in practice and stuff like that about instruction and feedback, and most of it is internal focus. So it's I think the research end of things is definitely there. That's why we kind of sort of stops looking at or doing studies where we're just comparing internal and external foci. I think that's been shown for so much that we've kind of moved on beyond that. And so now, for example, we're looking at again, like I mentioned, the analogies, the metaphors, the images, the distance of the attentional foci. There's a lot more that we're looking into now. But to your point, I think coaches and clinicians have bought in. It's just the application of it that we need to do a little bit better with, and that comes on our end as well, right? We need to. We can put out publications all we want, and we can, add that little paragraph at the end saying this is how you can apply it. But there needs to be sort of, I think coaches and clinicians want the sort of recipe of like, this is what to do, and this is how to do it, rather than reading, an 8-9 page article and then just till the end sort of paragraph and reading, hey, this is how you should apply it. So I think we can do better on our end as well. But yeah, I think the buy-in is there. It's just the application that needs to be a little better addressed.
As far as like the population you work with, we have like, if you take, youth sports to, high school to collegiate to high level performers or professional players, you have a lot of different skill levels in terms of how you teach individuals certain skills, right? So, at that bottom level. So how has that been like a kind of a shift, or like how do people apply that in terms of being able to, especially at the low level, like kids who barely can catch a ball, like how does that apply to some of that stuff, and also go to like the very end where you have all these skills developed? How do you make those people better?
So for one, I think you got to be more creative. I think coaches have to be very creative in what they do, and there's different coaching methodologies out there now. You can use something called a constrained slot approach, where you're not really saying much, but the environment sort of affords them to do certain actions than not. But what I've studied in terms of the attentional focus effect and expertise, what we've seen is that when you're more novice and you're still learning the task, these external cues that are closer to your body. So if I just take the volleyball example again, the platform that we use for passing is actually an external focus cue, because it represents the area of the wrist and arms and stuff like that, and the elbow. So if we compare these novices and experts, what we've seen is that novices are actually going to do better with these external focus cues that are closer to their body, because it resembles closer to technique, versus an expert who is probably off better focusing on sort of the bullseye or the target or the setter or whatever it may be. And they oftentimes do better in that sort of, with that sort of cue than this platform condition. And so that's kind of where the distance effect comes into play. That's what we're looking at right now. And so that's the paper that we recently published, and we looked at novices and experts and across expertise what happens. And so what our hypothesis is that as we get from novices to experts, one aspect of this distance of attentional focus effect is expertise level, and how that relates to sort of learning and performance. And for experts, it's more so, we don't have to focus on technique, because that's pretty much automatized at that point. We want to focus on the movement, the overall movement effect, which is, I want to get the ball to my setter or the target or whatever it is. So the implications, I think, are pretty vast. I think just as we teach, again, just for volleyball purposes, as we teach how to serve receive or teach how to pass and stuff like that, I think these have sort of their have drastic effects, and it's just it was just like an introductory paper. I think there's a lot more that we can do here, but obviously with COVID, it's a little hard. So just hoping and praying that we can get back to doing research as soon as we can. So
I wonder too, if developmentally as kids are progressing and they're spending more and more times on their phones, if you're going to have to either change the cues, pretend like you're texting, and that's where you're going to have to tell the kid a different positional thing. But I'm wondering too, if they aren't building up like that movement library when they're younger, if that's going to have a huge effect on how they're trying to progress as they're learning these skills when they move into sport.
Oh yeah. I teach motor development here, and that's the one thing I harp on is, this idea of experiences is a huge portion because we talk about, I just gave a lecture yesterday on stimulation and deprivation. You talk about like, being this idea of exploring different things. I mean, as you're developing, playing different sports, for example, is so beneficial for not only specializing later on, but just for your own, again, if you go back to the more development literature, social, cognitive, affective growth is so important that way. Versus maybe not even giving your child access to sports or something like that, or free play. These concepts which we've taken for granted, I think the research is definitely coming out now on how important play is, how important, all these different activities are going up, and how, you gotta at a young age allow your child to explore and not sort of just keep them, in your clutches, for example. So it's definitely a big portion of this, because at the end of the day, if we go back to the attentional focus literature, you have to know what we're asking you to do. I mean, if you have no idea if you have no idea what a platform is, chances are you're not going to understand that cue, right? So you have to be creative with it. And so, yeah, so that's, there was a couple studies that looked at like cue preferences and stuff like that. And preference is huge. Preference is and essentially it's motivational in nature, right? Because you like what you like that, and you like that cue, or you like that activity, or whatever it may be. So you're going to do better in it. So it's definitely this mix of like, motivation and attention, which stems from, as you mentioned, this idea of giving at a young age experiences to these individuals.
How do you feel it counts as practice reps as well? Like when people do like the self-visualization type thing, like Michael Phelps, for instance, like pretending for each stroke. I guess that's more of an internal thing, but how would that fit into with what you're doing?
Yeah, so mental imagery is really important. I think regardless of like, mental imagery has a huge portion of the motor learning literature as well, and it really hasn't been sort of correlated with attentional focus, as from my understanding. But the idea of visualizing and sort of using mental imagery has shown to be as beneficial, maybe a little bit less than physical practice itself. And so that's kind of really well developed in the literature. So one of the things that you could do, and actually I was just watching a lecture on motor learning and ACL rehab, and some of the things you could do even as a clinician, is when you're not physically doing a repetition, you can mentally do it, and it still stimulates this idea of the same, basically essentially the same neural correlates that you would as if you were physically doing it. So it's just another way to improve motor learning and performance. So I think it's important. The idea how it correlates to attentional focus, I think it's fresh. It hasn't been explored yet. I definitely have thought about it, but I think you'll need a lot of cool technology to do that, because I could just imagine, unless you just ask someone what they're imagining, or you do a study where the mental imagery sort of scenario is all external in nature. I mean, it's tough, I think, but it's definitely something I've thought about.
We'll have to wait for Elon Musk to make that Neuralink company, and then
right. Yeah.
And so how do you like to spend your time in Vegas when you're not, teaching and writing and doing your research?
So volleyball is definitely one. Yeah, I think Vegas has a very very cool and very diverse sort of volleyball community. Whether it's I'm playing beach volleyball on the weekends or during the week, or attending any open gyms around the area. I do what I can to make as many as I can, just so I can play. And we've made a pretty good community out of it. So it's nice to have people that are not graduate students, or your own students. So that's one. Just kind of going out there and playing and doing that whenever I can. Likewise, I really like to just go, again, kind of have like me time. So I'll go to like Red Rock and kind of just hike a little bit and just kind of take some time away from computers and books. One thing I do have to do is go explore a little bit more. I know Arizona's right here. I haven't never been, so I want to go there. Check out Grand Canyon and all that. I know the national parks are within driving distance. I still haven't been there, so I need to definitely um, make this last year really, really good and do that. But at the end of the day, you're so worried to like. For me, it's if I don't say do something during the day or read a paper, I just feel like I didn't do anything. Despite the fact that I'll go out, my mental health would be great, but like I'll come back and I'll be like, damn, I didn't do anything today. So, balancing that is really important. And my family is really supportive, and they know this, they know the struggle that being a PhD student is. And so, they'll tell me to take a day off or two whenever I'm like going crazy and stuff like that. So I have a pretty good support system outside of Vegas, which helps me a lot. Um, but it's a learning experience, and in an accelerated PhD program, it's you're expected to get a lot done in a little bit of time, and so you kind of have to do what you can. And I think the aspect of just being active, going to the gym, playing volleyball has sort of kept me sane. And one thing I would like to do is definitely go explore a little bit more around the area before I get out of here. So, yeah.
What is a day in the life in a PhD student? So what does that entail for you? And it's probably changed, since
Yeah.
you've been doing stuff. But
So before COVID, it was basically, we would have teaching responsibilities. So you would have to go teach. I was teaching at that point anatomy and physiology. So I would teach that about 3 days a week. So you would have to, prepare sort of for that, number one, and that requires about 20 hours. That's what the GA ship is all about. So you basically have 20 hours dedicated towards your teaching responsibilities during the week. Then you have to obviously do your own research. So you have to, once you sort of create a question and whatnot, you have to schedule research participants, do the actual testing, and then analyze all the results. And then if you find something cool, you have to write about it. And that entails you to go read everything that's been done and kind of figure out where this fits, and go so on and so forth. So before COVID, it was kind of just like wake up, I'll go to the gym, I'll go teach, and then I'll just kind of be in my lab until around 6, 7 o'clock, where I would be working on those things, whether it's reading articles, uh, going over some data and whatnot. So that's that. But now, with COVID, it's actually been, I guess it's been a little better in a sense, because I'm not teaching anatomy and physiology anymore. I'm teaching motor development. So I just, my class is asynchronous. So I record my lectures before and I just give them out. And so I don't have to really go to school or anything. So it's good. I can just wake up and kind of just start reading and writing and stuff like that. So it's definitely a little easier, I think, now. But again, now the sort of stressor is, well, you got to publish more papers, figure out how you can do research within this pandemic, and then, if any, and then prepare for all these exams. So it's like, I definitely like it a little bit better, but it's still busy, keeps you busy. And the one thing I'll say is, as a PhD student, I really harp on sort of being like active in a sense, and taking calls from coaches, and I really want to know what coaches and clinicians are doing and applying this stuff. So I'll have people reach out to me, like coaching staffs and clinicians, trying to ask how they can apply what we do, and I'll take those calls, because I think it's really important for me as a PhD student to understand how they're looking at it, because they're the practitioners here, and how we can better, I guess, relay that information. So that's sort of what a good portion of my time is also spent on. And obviously, as a PhD student, you're kind of like your own entrepreneur in a sense, where like, you have to put yourself out there, whether it's through social media, writing, or whatever, because at the end of the day, you do need a job, and so you're really trying to make these connections in a sense, and hopefully that turns into a job in the future. So you got to balance everything. I think as you guys know, I mean, it's hard to, be your own boss. That's for sure.
It's also
So,
fun too at the same time, right? You're learning a
yeah,
ton about yourself
yeah.
and whoever you're working with, and like building those relationships with people. I think that's been super fun for us.
Oh yeah, I think same here. The calls I take, the calls I do, it's all about building these relationships that I know in the future can either help me or definitely when I need help, I can always reach out to these individuals. And so yeah, I wouldn't take it back. I think it's for me, it's a great learning experience, and I wouldn't yeah, I wouldn't change it. So
As different people have different roles in their life, right? Parents, coaches, athletes. How would you kind of how can they best apply your research into what they're doing in their daily life? Like, say for example, a parent is hovering over a coach or whatever that is. Like,
yeah, yeah,
some there are
yeah.
some parents who would definitely dominate uh, some of the stands, if you will. But how can you what advice would you give to parents, to incorporate your research into what their kids doing?
Yeah, I get it. Parents want the best of their children, and I think the problem stems from parents want the best for their children in the moment, like right then. They want them to look good. They want them to, and it's great. I mean, as a parent, I'd want that too. But the idea of learning takes time. I think you're not gonna. It's not gonna. It's gonna look ugly in the beginning, and so you have to understand that, and not ask for perfection. Chances are you ask for perfection, the kid's going to lose interest in the sport. And if you ask for perfection from the coach, again, the coach is probably a volunteer or just kind of, making ends meet or doing it because they love what they do. Maybe you can, instead of hovering over them, give them, your sort of options and your thoughts and stuff like that in a sort of nice, cool, collected manner. But at the end of the day, coaches are doing this out of passion because they love to teach. Most coaches, at least, they love to teach and they want these children to grow. I mean, as an athlete, I can go back to my youth days, and those coaches played such a great impact in my life, that I remember those coaches probably a little bit more better than I do like college coaches and stuff like that, or my high school coaches. Because they just sort of trusted me in a sense, and they enlisted these this idea of confidence and respect and responsibility and these things that go well beyond sport. I mean, I personally believe sport can change perspective. I mean, I did some work in Honduras and Guatemala where it was just sort of utilizing this idea of physical activity, and we taught public health through sport. So we would teach them, how to teach their hands by playing soccer. I mean, it was pretty interesting. But to kind of go back to your point, I think sport can change perspective. It can really help children get out of whatever they're in, and if they're facing depression, for example, or their parents come from a economically disadvantaged background. I mean, the sport is like, I think is such a great quote unquote medicine that we have to do better with. But to your point, I think the aspect of learning takes time, and so we need to really understand that it's not gonna be perfect right away. And so once you understand that, what you do when you grow older, I think going through school and stuff, you start to realize that we can't really chase, or we really can't really have perfection today, but we're going to take a step towards that, and it might look ugly. But as a young child, I think you just want to have fun. And so let them have fun. Losing is a part of life, and that's okay. You can't win everything. And again, I think that the one thing is just learning. Learning takes a lot of time. Yeah.
I love that. How about as an athlete? What would you give advice to an athlete who's maybe frustrated and kind of stuck at a certain level? They haven't haven't made a team or haven't been improving on a certain skill.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think I've been getting into a lot of the intrinsic motivation literature, and I think just this idea of telling them, obviously it sucks not making a team, or because then you got to wait a whole year and stuff like that. I think it sucks not making a team. It sucks being in a sort of in a rut where you're not playing well, and maybe you're sitting on the bench and whatnot. And I've been through that, and I think the one thing that's helped me a lot is just kind of focusing on what I have done good, what I've done better in a sense. What are the good things that I've done in the past that have allowed me to perform well? And okay, sometimes you're gonna face a rut where you're not playing well and whatnot, and it's like, what can I do right now to support my players and support this team, so that they can be the best they can be. And that's this whole idea of being a team player. I think is really important. But individually, I think focusing on what you've done good in the past, how you did that, and how you can better yourself now, and sort of enlist that same confidence that you had before. And so when I was in like it was high school, I think, and we were okay in basketball, and basketball was like my sort of secondary sport at that point. Um, but there was we were playing some of the best teams in New Jersey, and New Jersey has some really good players that come out of there. I mean, you're talking about Kyrie Irving came out of New Jersey. You're talking all these different NBA players, and we played all of them. We because we were in that sort of league, and so we lost a lot of games, but there was also a rut where I didn't score any points for like 8 games straight, and I was not only was I a starter, but I was kind of always kind of getting around 12 to 16 points a game, and so there was like 8 games where I scored nothing, and so I started to really struggle, not only there, but it affected my classwork and stuff like that too. But one thing I realized was that just being a good team player, and kind of having a team that trusts you, and telling you that they believe in you, they're going to give you the next shot no matter what. That really helps, goes a long way. And for me personally, just kind of enlisting confidence in myself, talking to my parents about my struggles, and kind of opening up allowed me to really understand that it's okay that I'm struggling right now. But uh, again, I've done it in the past. I can do it again. I have to just push forward, and believe in myself and believe in my ability. I think that's important. And this idea of conception of ability, for example, if my coach believes in me and sort of tells me that I can do something rather than I can't, that goes a long way. And so um, I think as an athlete, that's probably what I'd say to them. It's a long-winded answer of just saying, think about how you've done it in the past, and kind of enlist that confidence again inside of you.
So what's something that you've learned that you wish you knew sooner?
Uh, um, Cooking, to be honest. I think that's one of the main things that, as the first time I'm sort of living on my own. um, I went to school in New Jersey, and family was right there because I was born and raised there. um, but then when I went overseas in England, that was the first time I kind of lived on my own. And then but that was only for a couple months, so it wasn't like too bad. So now, you come here, and it's like it's been 3 years now, right? Living on my own, you can't really eat out every day. It's kind of to a point it gets really it's disgusting at one, and then it's kind of just like the same old stuff. So I've been fortunate enough to really be creative, and kind of learn cooking. And so I'm a vegetarian, so I like to cook like a lot of cool different meals. For example, I learned how to do like this General Tso tofu, which is pretty good. Like all this stuff, which I've never done in the past. So I spent actually a good portion of my day just cooking. So that's something that I've definitely learned in the past 3 years, and I love it. I think is kind of exploring sort of new foods, and new recipes. I think is really really cool.
So having asked that, what's your favorite cheat meal?
Oh, cheat meal? Yesterday, In-N-Out. So I I love it, and so I'm a vegetarian, so I love In-N-Out's grilled cheese sandwiches. I don't know why. I don't know. It just tastes really good, and then the animal style just makes it a lot better. And so being on the West Coast, that's pretty much, you don't have that on the East. So In-N-Out is like, I'm going to take as much as I can of it now, before I head out, if I head out back to the East. So that's my cheat meal. And then once in a while, I'll have Taco Bell, but now Taco Bell changed their menu, so I don't know.
I think it's just the same ingredients. They just like shuffle them together different ways.
I'm pretty sure too, but it's yeah, it's all right.
What's something you've been working on, and can be professionally, mentally, physically, what's something that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm really excited about what like my future is. I think sometimes I've always been told to like stay in the present. I'm pretty spiritual in nature, so it's just kind of being thankful every day and being just being present. But when I think about it in my future sort of career and whatnot, like I said in the beginning, I genuinely love what I do in motor learning, and I think the fact that the field is small, there's not a lot of people that do it or study it, gives me excitement for the future because we can be sort of pioneers in what we're doing. And the sort of the research and the trajectory that it's headed in, the people that are kind of implementing our work, it's really exciting to see the calls that I've been on in terms of whether it's, injury prevention at the NFL level, um, or it's just sort of performance and coaching at the NBA level. Like this idea of like how these experts are applying our sort of field of study kind of makes me excited. And whether or not I'm one day going to be in that sort of realm, or maybe part of an NFL team or an NBA team, that doesn't really matter to me. I think just the excitement is that the work I'm doing is meaningful, and just like you guys are clinicians, the work you do with your patients is pretty meaningful. If you see a little bit of progression, that means a lot. And so, same thing with me, just seeing a little progression in the research we're doing, and then actually being applied. I mean, that makes me really excited. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the future and to see where I go with this, because I think again, if you find your passion in what you do, it can just take you anywhere you want. So.
And what's something that you want to leave the listeners with?
Uh, you know, in general, I think this idea of believing in yourself we talk about it so much, but I think it's so important. There was a time where I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like I said, I wanted to go to medical school at one point. I wanted to pursue volleyball full time at one point. But just kind of believing in that everything will happen for a reason. And when it does, it's going to be the right reason, and just kind of following your passion. I think that's really important. And with passion comes belief. And so I think once you kind of really understand that and you're content with who you are, I mean, there's nothing that can break you. And I think that's sort of, and that's in any field. That's whether you're a PhD student, a researcher, a PT, a student. I mean, it's finding that sort of thing that makes you genuinely happy is going to take you a long way.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
And how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm really on Twitter a lot. It's at my last name Singh _ my first name Harjiv, and then email is cool too. So just my first name _ my last name at unlv.edu. But yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter, but it's all research based. So if you want like sort of like to know what we're doing more and what the field is doing, then definitely follow me on Twitter. But that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah.
We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guests as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast, or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.